existence.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Today on this live stream, I'm going to be answering the top, I don't know how many questions, but the top, let's say 8 to 10 questions I get with audio post-production. So where these are coming from is YouTube comments, questions, and then our members only Discord. The first one we're going to answer actually comes from Dan. And he says, I'm working on the first show I've done that is coming in with 4 reels. So there's a question about the reel versus long play workflow that we'll jump right into. But first, just a couple housekeeping things. This stream you're listening to is being broadcast through Pro Tools, and my chain for my microphone here is Pro Q3 by FabFilter, going through Cedar ScreenVox, and then Auto Compressor, this is a plugin that I made back in I think June or July of this year. So ScreenVox by Cedar and Auto Comp are kind of two of the secret sauce of my live streams. And if you want to pick them up, Auto Comp is on my website. I should have a link for that in the video description. And Cedar was kind enough to give me a FastSpring affiliate link. So if you want to pick up any of Cedar's plugins, it does help support my channel a little bit. And I truly believe they're the best broadband noise reduction for real-time processing that you can buy. And they recently dropped their price insanely. They used to be thousands of dollars. When I bought Cedar, it was like $5,000 or $3,000 or something. And now it's like $300. So that takes care of all the housekeeping stuff. We'll jump right into questions. So like I said, this first topic comes from Dan, and this Discord is for members only. So if you join the channel as a member, you get access to this, and there's always great ideas to talk about, really good conversations about tools and techniques. And it's been great. I check this pretty much every day, and I'm learning probably more than anybody else from just the discussion that happens on here. So thank you to channel members. You guys really keep this channel alive, and your discussion in the Discord is much appreciated. So thank you guys for that. So first topic, reels. What are reels? So reels are, if you're working on short form content, reels are not going to be anything you really hear about. But for a feature film, reels are manageable pieces of the film. They tend to be no more than about 21 minutes, maybe 22, but 20 minutes is kind of the maximum length. So for a feature film that's 90 minutes long, you're going to have 5 reels. That's just how it works out. And some of them are going to be 13 minutes or 18. You try to make the reel breaks in a part of the film where there's no music. You really don't want music bleeding over the reel breaks. We're going to talk about why you would work in reels, the strengths and weaknesses, and then some of the techniques for I guess, sewing the reels together so you can watch the whole film in its entirety. And then other topics, I wrote a couple down on my notes here. Difference between editing and mixing, we've talked about that quite a bit. Foley versus sound effects. A lot of people call everything Foley, especially directors. They say, let's Foley that. And that's not what Foley is. And then documentaries, we had another, I think it was a channel member or maybe a YouTube comment asking how the workflows for documentaries might be a little different than a narrative project. Some ADR mixing, if we have time to get to that. Order of operations when mixing. Somebody asked if I like to mix all the dialogue and then go back and do the music, or if I work scene by scene. And that's going to vary for each person. Everybody has their own workflows. And then if we have time, we'll get to loudness. But first, let's jump right into reels. So we're going to be in Pro Tools for this. I've got, these are not real video files. These are just dummy regions I've made to kind of show you. So we've got reel 1 And of course, the time code, where does reel 1 start? It starts at hour 1. And you have a 6-second countdown. You have the 2 pop at 6 seconds. And then the first frame of action would be at 01, 00, 08. And I like to sometimes label that with first frame of action. And then you've got reel 2, which would be the same thing, reel 3, reel 4, and reel 5. So let's just back up and discuss why you might want to work this way. You might want to work in reels. So one of the reasons you might want to work in reels, well, actually, let's go even further back and talk about the history of reels and why they're even considered as a workflow option. And Jen is asking, are they called reels because they literally used to be film on actual reels that were spliced together at movie houses? That is 100% the reason why they're called reels. It's because a reel of 35 millimeter or 70 millimeter film, probably even actually 16 millimeter, could only physically contain about 20 minutes of film, depending on, if it had sound, if it had an optical track, like all that. A canister of a 35 mag that would go to be projected could only hold 20 minutes. So of course, when you do audio post or editing, you're going to work with that length of time. You've got 20 minutes and then that's your reel, because the reels would need to be spliced together towards the end of the process to be, reviewed, or to even go to the theaters, really. Like the projectionist would have to sit there and tape together the mags to get the full length of the film. They'd make a super, I forget what they called it. There's a name for it where they spliced them together. And there were these little things at the top corner called cigarette burns. And you can actually see those in Fight Club. You'll see like cigarette burns left in on purpose. Really cool film. If you're a filmmaker, like Fight Club is just a great study guide for filmmaking, for audio posts too, but just filmmaking in general. So the projectionist would know, they had to splice the reels together at a very specific time, right on that frame. And so when we work in reels, we have to keep that in mind. And there's certain things we have to do to make that work. So that's kind of the physical limitation of the film era. The feature films were too long to fit on a single roll of film. So a reel could hold 10 to 20 minutes and that's it. The other practical thing, I guess, of why it's good to work in reels, because we talked about, touched on the history of it. And Ricardo says, ciao. Ricardo's from Italy, if I remember correctly. I was about to say bom dia, which is Portuguese, but good morning to everybody. So it makes your life as a sound editor, sound mixer, even picture editor easier to work in reels, because let's say, and I know this is a stretch, but let's say they give you the 5 reels of the movie. And just spitballing here, not saying this ever happens, but just, roll with me on this. Let's say there's a few picture changes down the road. Their locked picture was not really locked. And you get lock version 2 and lock version 3 and lock version 5 and lock version August 29th, 2025. What happens when you get picture changes? You have to do a conform. If you have things broken up into reels, maybe there's 100 changes in reel 1, but there's only 2 changes in reel 2. Well, if you have all your media in reel 1 in its own session, even if it's not its own session, but you start conforming, you're only going to be adjusting this reel. The other reels are going to be fine. They're going to be quarantined. So you can kind of limit the damage to reel 1 to be just right there. Bam. It's just in that timeline. And so the picture changes can be much more contained to just the reel where most of the changes are. So when it comes to conforming and doing picture changes, absolutely reels have the edge on that. So that is a practical thing. The other thing is just mentally, it's nice to have that break between reels. Like, okay, Monday and Tuesday I have to get through reel 1. Wednesday, Thursday, reel 2. It's a nice, you know, kind of yardstick for where your progress needs to be. I love working in reels because of that, because I can really time things out. And maybe reel 1 has a lot of action and reel 2 doesn't. Then I can kind of like, you know, assign my time better working in reels versus a 90-minute video file where I have to like be like, oh yeah, I have to get to scene 25. It's just a nice visual. So that's a really nice benefit to have in reels. So some of the drawbacks of reels are you can get kind of lost. Like maybe you have one Pro Tools session with all your reel 1 stuff. How do you move material from reel 1 to reel 2? Well, you might need to have a super session with all 5 reels and all the material. Those sessions can get massive. And then the biggest thing, which Simon is touching on, is changeovers between reels. And we'll talk about that. Don't let me forget that, because that is the most important thing I want to cover. But kind of the downside of working in reels is you can have inconsistencies between the reels, and you have to worry about the changeover points. And especially when there's music at the changeover point, that can be just awful. It's really, really, really bad. And it just creates this big headache. So let's talk about doing changeovers between reels. Paul Cruz is asking, do you know how to eat with chopsticks? Great question. I was just at a sushi restaurant yesterday. I do know how to eat with chopsticks. So reel changeovers. What you're going to have to do is, there's 2 ways to do it. The first way to do it, you can see I've got 2 mix record tracks. Let me make these 3 large so we can really focus in on here. So I've got a mix record 1 and a mix record 2. All of my tracks are feeding into these record tracks. And so let's say I've finished reel 1. Maybe I finished all the reels. We're getting towards the end of this project. How do I check the reel changeovers to make sure there's no ticks or pops in there? The way I was taught is to record the end and beginning of the reels. So if, for example, reel 2, you have a 2-pop at, 206. So there's a 2-pop here, and then you're going to have your first frame of action at 2000800. We're going to call this FFOA R2. So you've got this little gap here where there's going to be a 2-pop, and you're going to have silence, and then the first frame of action for reel 2 is going to start. So the best thing you can do is record this. Let me put it in grid mode. Is record this. We're going to call this reel 2 pull up. My B. Reel 2 pull up. So one thing you can do is you can take this reel 2 pull up and you can go to the end of reel 1. You're going to have 2 seconds here. Last frame of action, reel 1. And then paste it here. And then route this into here. So let's make, I need to set up a quick IO for this. Bear with me here. Not 51. We want 5.1 mix record. Okay, sure, that's fine. Okay, so this is going to output to your mix. You're actually feeding your mix back to your mix. And what will happen is, as this changeover occurs from your live tracks feeding into this one's on input mode, it'll switch over to the playback from reel 2, and you can make sure that you've got a nice transition there. So this is one way you can do it. You can literally print the beginning of reel 2, and I'll show you kind of the time code on, is it original timestamp? Yeah. So see how the time, it's a little maybe hard to see on the stream, but this time code says 20008. So the pull-up happens right there. And then when you record into this, you're going to be recording the pull-up, which you've printed from reel 2, into the end of your reel 1, which is fine. And then you've got your 2-pop here. It's a tail pop, really. So you're actually re-recording the material to this dead space that would normally happen between your last frame of action and your tail pop, and that's totally fine. You can do the same thing, like let's say you record this. Bam, we'll just call this reel 1 ending. Chop it there. So here's the last frame of action of reel 1, and then you just go to your reel 2 and do the opposite here. So this is going to be our playback. And then you just have to make sure that this crossing point here contains, like this, the first frame of action of reel 2 is the last frame of action of reel 1. Those have to match up. So that's one way to do it. That's kind of the old school way to do it. And then you play this back and record it, and it'll be fine. So you're kind of like checkerboarding your mix. You're printing the end of the reel to the beginning of the next reel all the way down. That's one way to do it. That's kind of the old school way to do it. The other way to do it is, and it's a little dicey once you get mixes with 500 tracks, is cut off your reel 1, the end of your reel 1, go to the beginning. You can actually do this with your markers here. Let's do this the real way I would do it, okay? So we've got 5 reels in our pretend project here. Let's go to reel 6. We're going to make a reel 6, and this is going to be called long play. You can copy and paste your reels to a long play and then just cut off the tail pop. So it'd be like 2 seconds. Like this, cut it. You do this with all of your tracks as well. All 500 tracks. That's why this is kind of like the nuclear option. So I'm copying reel 2, I'm tabbing to the end of reel 1 with all of my tracks, and I'm pasting. And you can build your long play this way as well, with all of your video and all of your tracks. You could similarly do that with just your print masters. Copy and paste your 5.1, print the mix and copy and paste it to a long play and check. The cool thing about doing it that way is you can actually punch in to these mix files, and those changes will be reflected if you have them copied at the end of the session. So yeah, sorry that's like, it's a little technical, I guess, but if you're working in reels, you have to account for the reel changeovers, and those are 2 ways to do it. If you have music going over, the changeover becomes extremely difficult, and you have to make sure all of your automation, clip gain, volume, every part of your mix plays through the end of the reel and into the beginning of the next reel. You can do your write to your automation commands for that. Like, so you got last frame of reel 1. Maybe you grab like just a couple frames of all of your automation on all of your tracks. Hopefully there's a scene change or something in the middle so the background ambience doesn't get too messed up. Go all the way a couple frames into your first frame of reel 1, and then let me bring up Keycaster so you guys can see this. Then you do Option, Command, question mark right here. Option, Command, question mark. And that'll write your automation through to the beginning of the reel. So that explains the different methods of doing pull-ups, pull-downs, reel changeovers, whatever you want to call them. That was like a huge question I wanted to cover because I haven't seen anybody really ask it before, and it's kind of one of those like not really talked about things. Like, it's not a secret, but it's like there's just not a lot of knowledge shared out there. So great question. Sorry that took so long, but that's the most difficult technical question. I'm going to go through some comments now. I was wondering, this is from the Lost Guitar. I was wondering how you decide what from your production audio you put on your dialogue tracks and what on PFX, and how strict you are with your decision. If I'm cutting dialogue for myself, I will pull out a lot of production effects, Production effects are those sounds that aren't dialogue but are recorded on set. So if the actors are walking, they're opening doors, they're eating with utensils, all of those non-dialogue sounds can go to your sound effects stem. They really should go to your sound effects stem. So anything that is loud, spiky, transient, or maybe is questionable, like, I don't know if these footsteps are that good, I'll put them on PFX tracks and then I'll fill the dialogue tracks out. But as always, and this is kind of like the golden rule when you're cutting dialogue, ask the mixer, because the mixers might say, I don't want any PFX tracks, or they might say, yeah, pull everything that's dialogue out. So I like to be pretty aggressive with cutting PFX. I also like to add PFX if like there's something that an actor does and there's no sound recorded from the production sound. I will look through the other takes for it, because yeah, Foley's going to cover it, but it's going to be the real sound if you pull it from the production tracks. So great question. Mr. Nelson, speaking of reconforms, how would reconforming sound effects and Foley tracks work? The same way as dialogue. I treat them all the same. Backgrounds are kind of the one sticky wicket, because when a picture edit comes in where they change the order of things and they take this scene and swap it with the other scene, your checkerboards can get kind of messed up. So you might end up with some C tracks instead of just A and B for dialogue or for backgrounds. But generally the sound effects and Foley go the same as the dialogue on a reconform. Reconform meaning new picture comes in, you have to move your tracks around to be in sync. The most difficult thing with reconforms is music. And if you don't have a music editor and you have to do the music editing yourself, that's where you're going to be spending a lot of your time. So good question. Paul says, when it comes to reconforming, nothing on the market comes close to Nuendo. That is great. I don't really work with Nuendo. I've used it a couple times, and I know it's popular in other markets, but in the US, if you're working in audio post, you are in Pro Tools. Let me back up. If you're making a full-time living in audio post in the US, you're working in Pro Tools. Let's see. Russ McMurtry says, working on my first reeled up project now. I've always been used to the 2-pop hitting at 59, 58. Is there any specific reason why this project is 0, 0, 6? So, okay, I think I understand. So this project is starting at the hour of each reel. So reel 1 is hour 1, reel 2 is hour 2, reel 3 is hour 3, reel 4 is hour 4, reel 5 is hour 5. And that's just how I let me look up and see, because this is you guys don't need to see me type in this. Why do reels start at hour 1? I'm not really sure the answer. So I know that like you should never start your project at hour 0 because that's just it's midnight. Like that's the midnight time and it doesn't really work. But the way I've thought of it starting at hour 1 and hour 2 is just so there's no confusion. Like reel 1 starts at hour 1. That just makes sense to me. And I think, let me see what ChatGPT says. It says, yeah, like for TV, it's different. For TV, picture starts at hour 1. And it's just a difference in working from film where the video for the reel starts at hour 1 and your first frame of action is actually, how do I do the big counter? Where's that big counter? Gosh, I've forgotten so many shortcuts because I just don't use them. Somebody tell me how to bring up that giant counter. There it is. It's Command 3. Okay. Yeah, I never use this. So in film, our first frame of action, meaning where the movie actually starts, is 8 seconds on the reel. 8 seconds and 0 frames. And broadcast generally doesn't work that way. Broadcast generally, first frame of action is hour 1, and your countdown starts at 59:52. And yeah, it depends on the network though. Some of them want different time codes. Like pretty much all the TV I've worked on has been 59:58 is the 2-pop, and hour 1 is the start of the actual episode. And then for film, the video starts at hour 1. The 2-pop is at 6 seconds, and the first frame is at 8 seconds. So I don't really know why. Good question. Sorry, I don't have a clear answer for that. Simon says, I'll try the print technique. Yeah, you can do square fades too, but then you get a little dropout. Paco says, how do you manage reverb and dialogue in Foley? Generally, I don't use a lot of reverb. Oh, okay. For where to send the reverb, yeah, use the center channel. I do a lot of mono reverbs when I mix. Sometimes I'll use a surround reverb or a stereo, but generally mono, I want it just glued to the center. Bill Shupp says, when pulling out PFX, what about sounds that overlap with dialogue? There's a great example of this in a show I worked on called 1923. If any of you have watched 1923, I got to help out on the first and second seasons. And the second season, I worked on the finale, the last episode. And there, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there's a lot of action. And there is a part where a main character is firing a bolt action rifle while saying their lines. And it's a real rifle, and they're really firing blanks. And so you get the chunk of the bolt coming back and ejecting the round and the trigger pull and all that. And there's a lot of PFX that I wanted to save in that little sequence. So the problem is the mechanism of the gun was so much louder than her lines that it's like, well, I know the mixer would like to have separation. So how do I separate these? What I did is I actually rebuilt that line with alts. I went through every single take multiple times to find the words that she said that matched up sync performance. And I cut those in, and it was completely clean. Now I've lost all the sound of the rifle, and it's a character rifle. So I went back through the takes a fourth time and found all the clean mechanisms of that rifle and cut them in sync. So now the mixer has PFX with no dialogue. They have the alts that I've cut in that are clean with no PFX. And they have the original, which is mixed. It's both. There's no separating them. There are tools you can use to separate out PFX. Isotope, RX Advanced. Some of the newer AI noise reducers can do that a little bit. Generally, I do it manually. I'll go in and draw out the PFX, but then you have to add them back in. So if they're truly mixed and it sounds good, I would say just leave it. The PFX will be in the dialogue. You can't split them out. For the M&E, you'll have to use Foley for it. So really don't worry about it too much. If you can, find alts to separate them. You know, an alt read on the line and an alt PFX, great. Then, cut that and have it as an option. Otherwise, don't worry about it. Good question. Nadav Shelley, are you in any union? Yes, I am a member of the MPEG Local 700 union. They're a, I guess, subsidiary of IATSE, or they fall under the IATSE umbrella. It's the International Alliance of Theater Stage Engineers, I think is what it stands for. So probably half my work in a year comes from union projects, and then the other half comes from indie. My opinions on the union are that I'm really thankful to have work when I have it. Benefits are really good. The pay is great. But I don't know. The union doesn't guarantee you work. And I don't know that there's a way for them to guarantee you work. So I do have kind of maybe some reservations about the amount of money that gets spent by the union. Like they, send people to Hawaii for stuff, and like that stuff kind of bothers me. But I'm not the one making the decisions. So kind of just got to, trust what they're doing and hope that it benefits all the members in the union. But I do love working on union projects. It's like, you really can't compare it. There's a certain skill expectation, the quality of the projects is unilaterally better when you're working on union projects. Expectations are a lot higher, but also I find that people are like at that level, you have to be good enough where like there's not a lot of hand holding. Like you're kind of just, here's the work, do your job, and it's expected that you're at the top of your game. So indie projects tend to be more, well, I don't know about that. And, here's like 10 pages of notes. And all the union stuff I've worked on has just been like, good job. See you on the next one. So that's my thoughts on that. Okay. What is the correct method film mastering for the theater? Film mastering, I mean, if you're talking about like muxing the video and audio, making a DCP, I don't really know too much about that. If you're talking about audio mastering, there's no audio mastering in audio post. You mix it and you send it out. There's no, what's isotope mastering? There's no ozone at the end of the chain. There's none of that stuff that you would do for music. It's really just mix it, make the director happy, print it, and that's what goes out to theaters. Good question though. Russ McMurtry says, I've always been an hour first frame of action. Why do some sound editors premix their tracks before it gets to the mixers? Usually time, or they don't trust the mixers maybe. Margarita asks, in what situations use a surround reverb? Okay, good question. I will use a surround reverb. For example, let's say you have a scene set in a beautiful chapel, a big, one of those Gothic chapels with super high ceilings, and the main character's praying to himself. And then the pastor comes in and says, you're late. On the wide shot, I'll use a surround reverb to give you the sense of space and, that the characters are deep in the space. Once it goes into coverage, these are my camera guys here. Once it goes into coverage, the surround reverb will be gone. I'm only going to want it for those special wide shots, or if somebody yells really loud. Really to like everything I talk about on my channel, I always ask, does this support the story? And if it doesn't, I'm not going to do it. If it does, yeah, go for it. So surround reverb for like an entire scene generally is just going to muddy things up. It's not going to sound very good. Picking special moments to use it, to just add that little bit of Lowry's on the chicken, I think is really good. But like just blanketing with surround reverb, it's too boring. So I don't do that. It's really special moments. Good question. Let's see. Good. Okay, got that one. Ava Studios. Hi, Tom. I'm sure you've talked about it, but when you're making fill for multiple mics, you grab room tone from each of those. That's a really good question. I've seen people cutting dialogue tight on the lavs. They will, let me see if I have something. Yeah, I've seen people cut, like, here's a boom, here's two lavs. I've seen people do this, where they're like, just kind of, I just want the words. And it's fine. Like a lot of UK people do this. They cut it tight. Maybe they do some fade ins, fade outs. This will generally sound good. But the downside to cutting this way and having your boom filled all the way is that, let's say the director says, or the dialogue mixer says, you know what? We're not going to use the boom for this. Now you've got giant holes in your dialogue edit. So you're really telling the mixer, you know what? You have to use the boom. And in fact, you have to use the boom at such a loud level that it covers up my lazy bones editing here. So I like to fill things all the way through, even if it means keeping some schmutz in there, a little bit of dirt or grit. I prefer editing where I can solo the boom and it's good all the way through. And I can solo the lavs as a composite and they play all the way through with no gaps. So I generally look for room tone in both the boom and each lav, so that when they're soloed as a group of tracks, meaning the lavs are soloed and the boom is soloed, they play kind of as their own mix, you know? So that also helps if the mixer is doing VCAs for lavs, because if they turn the lavs way up and the boom all the way down, there won't be any really big gaps in the fill. So good question. Okay. Oh, sorry, Bill. Shoop. I will pronounce your name correctly from now on. Shoop. I'll remember that. Man, you want to talk about some names, last names that get mispronounced? Boykin is tough. Boykin was probably the biggest one I heard. And in high school, being known as Boykin was... Actually, that wasn't too bad. Next question. Hi, Thomas. I just started an internship in a studio, and I wanted to know if you give me some tips on what I should focus on learning apart from the technical stuff. Oh, good question. So this is good. If you're actually working or interning in a studio, you need to learn client skills. That would be the number one thing. Being easy to work with, listening, taking notes, making people want to work with you is probably the most important thing about working in the film industry. More important than skill, more important than good hearing, as evidenced by the number of mixers with severe hearing damage. Your ability to please clients and make them want to work with you is like the number one skill you should be working on. So to do that, I would say try to kill as much of your ego as you can and be really humble. Don't argue when you get a note. Just be a yes man or yes woman. And even if you disagree with stuff, be willing to try it. That's something I see people push back because of their art or their supposed authority as a sound person, is getting a suggestion from somebody and saying, I'm not going to do that. Or, nah, I don't want to do that. Or I'm not going to try that. Or here's why that won't work. The best thing you can do when you get even a crazy wild note is say, you know what, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And then if you're asked, what do you think about that? That's when you pipe in with your own thoughts. But don't be a negative Nancy. That's kind of like a big thing about working with clients. It's important how they feel after they're done working with you. Even as an intern or assistant, getting them a cup of coffee or doing a lunch run and being, eager to please is going to get you to the mix chair faster than rolling your eyes or doing the Gen Z gaze all the time. Like, just be a go-getter, work hard, and then kind of keep your head down is another one. So good question. Did you ever try Nuendo? Yes, I've tried it. In Europe, it's used a lot because all the Pro Tools it's lack. So the main thing, not to crap on Europe, but I mean, it's lower budget. Like, let's just be honest. In Europe, they don't have the post-production budgets we have in the US. So yeah, you guys are going to be working on Nuendo and GarageBand and Vegas and Cool Edit Pro and Audition and all the like kind of lower budget, I don't want to say unprofessional, but Fisher Price digital audio workstations, which is totally fine. Every stream, you guys want to tell me how great Nuendo is. I love reading that because I just see that $100 come out of my bank account every month going to Avid, and it's like, yeah, paying this blood tax every month is really worth it. I really love, and the speed that Avid releases updates like folder tracks and glitch-free automation, like those updates, those speedy updates, I don't mind waiting 10 years for those. It's totally fine. Like, take your time, Avid. I know, you're not getting enough money from everybody. So yeah, up the price, take your time, whatever you guys need to do to just slowly bleed people dry, I'm all about. So good job, Avid. Whoever makes Nuendo, it's probably like Citroen or one of those European automakers. I don't know. That's good too. Use what you want. Don't use a DAW. Cut it on 35, cut it on 2-inch, 24 track. I don't really care. Can a 2-mixer workflow work without Pro Tools Satellite? Ooh, I don't know. You probably could, but I don't think it would be frame accurate. So yeah, probably wouldn't work that well. Oh, okay, I understand. I asked about sound mastering. You're talking about loudness levels. There are no specific loudness levels for theaters, much to the disappointment, I would say, of many moviegoers, because I've been to mixes where they were too loud. As a mixer with minor hearing damage, they were too loud. I was covering my ears. And having been put in that position where I'm pushed to make things too loud, I really think something needs to be done about it for theaters. I think there needs to be a maximum sustained loudness level. It kind of goes back to the top of the stream. We were talking about the history of reels, technical limitations. It used to be that film was limited to loudness because of the nature of the optical track. It could only hold an LTRT encoded 2-track mix. And so headroom, -12. You got no headroom. Like, stuff is limited by the playback medium. Now we have how many tracks? We have Atmos, basically unlimited numbers of tracks, unlimited headroom because of digital. We have great amplifiers that don't clip. We've got big, huge cinema speakers that can play back, 120 decibels of white noise. Something needs to be done to contain the loudness of mixes, because it's just ridiculous. Like, and what's the proof of that? Theaters are turning down their Dolby box. There's, their Christie projectors and their Dolby boxes. They're turning them down to fader 4.5 or 3.5 because people are complaining that stuff is too loud. And then what happens? People mix even louder because the theaters are turning stuff down. So it's like the loudness wars of the CD age in the early 2000s, late 90s in film. And I really think something needs to be done that limits the dynamic range without limiting the creative output. And anybody who's mixed for TV knows what I'm talking about. For TV, you've got loudness specs you got to hit. You can still do a great mix, but you don't have to be hitting -10 sustained for 2 minutes because a rocket's taking off, So I think that's where we'll end up. Okay, good question. So there's no standard for theaters, unfortunately. How often do you mix lav and boom together? Every single mix. Francois says, "Hi Tom, I bet you already answered this, but when you're mixing dialogue to -24 LUFS, do you let screams go past?" Yes, I do. Screams can be quite loud. Ava, for auto-assembling production tracks to a reference track, what other methods are there besides FRT guide track and Pro Tools, or having pick, editor, line up everything? Good question. So there are some software solutions to that. What's the Assemblerator, I think, is one. Titan is one. Kraken Dialogue Editor's Toolkit is another one, although that uses a forum. I believe it uses a form of field recorder guide track. I feel like there's one or two other software ones, but they all are pretty expensive. Like, they're all in that $500 to $600 range. I think Titan is a little more. But yeah, you're going to pay for it. And field recorder guide track is faster. Or cheaper. It's cheaper. It's not faster. It's cheaper. Francois asks about backgrounds. What do you add to your interiors? I like to add, room tone. It depends on the scene, but I try to be very creative. I love cutting backgrounds because you get to think of the characters and the world they live in and add sounds that aren't shown. And so I try to keep stuff grounded to the film. Like, if it's an intimate scene, you may not need anything more than just a mono room tone for an entire scene. If there's world building opportunities and there's space, like the dialogue is spaced out and it's slow and there's no music, because music will just completely cover up all your backgrounds, then you can be creative. So I like to think, what's the like socioeconomic status of the characters? If they're kind of lower income, I'm going to put, rattling car trunks with hip hop music, rattling the license plates going by. I'm going to put big dogs barking like pit bulls and Malinois and stuff. I'm going to put neighbors outside, doing neighbor stuff, because the walls in an apartment are very thin if you're low income. I'm going to do cars starting, people coming and going because they got to get to work. I'll do kids playing because if you've ever lived in a lower income place, like the kids are always playing outside. And that's how I grew up. So I try to think of the characters, what their world is, and then also ask how much of that can we hear? How much do we need to hear? Does it help the story? That's the big thing. So interiors, you can actually add quite a bit. Think of what's above, below, and outside. And don't be afraid to mute those, as you're mixing, like take some out, bring them in and out dynamically, or just kill them all together. Sometimes backgrounds don't help. They actually take away from the dialogue. Good question. Hello, Tom. I'd like to ask, working on a 7.1.4 project, would it be wrong to use reverb in cube format? Cube format, I believe you're talking about using, correct me if I'm wrong, but the left surround, right surround, and then the top four. That would sound really interesting. Pranay Kara, could you make a video about automation tricks? Yeah, I could do that. The main thing I use is preview and right to selection. So those are this and this guy, right automation to selection. So when I'm mixing, I'll be in preview mode, I'll loop it, I'll, adjust my EQ and noise reduction, all that. And I'm immediately clicking right to selection. And no automation was written because I haven't changed anything. And it's inactive. So I don't have much more than that. There's many third-party plugins for dialogue mixing, but not many for effects mixing. On sound effects heavy projects, can effects mixing really be done with just basic processing? Yes, and so Mr. Nelson says EQ, compression, reverb. You're missing the first most important, most powerful mixing adjustment you have, which is volume. Volume is always first. Sometimes if you put a sound effect at the right volume, you don't need to EQ it. You don't need to compress it. Really, if you think about it, each one of these, reverb maybe not, but EQ and compression are volume adjustments. With an EQ, you're adjusting the volume of individual bands. With compression, you're adjusting the range of volume. You can do all that with the fader, maybe the EQ not so much. But get the volume right first and then decide if you even need EQ, compression, and reverb. Because my big secret with sound effects mixing is I don't use much processing. If the sounds are correct, if they're edited correctly, good quality sounds are chosen, the right sounds are chosen, it's really just a volume adjustment and panning, and that's it. I don't have to EQ or compress it because the sound is correct. If the sound isn't correct, then I have to process it quite a bit. But really, if I'm going to be processing that much, at that point, I'm just going to recut it because it's not the right sound. Jimmy says, when you're doing sound design that's going to be mixed in Atmos, do you pan stuff or leave it to the mixer? I'll have some object tracks that I leave to the mixer and label them as object, OBJ 1 through 4, for example, on sound effects. Ava Studios was asking about the field recorder guide track because I don't have Pro Tools Ultimate, and having the pick editor line everything up messes up the metadata. Yeah, that's kind of a rough spot to be in. I would say just have the picture editor do it and figure out what channels are what by listening to them. It does make it faster to have the names, but you don't necessarily need them. Okay. I watch a movie in theaters. There's very soft LFE sounds, but I still couldn't handle low frequency very well. Still couldn't handle low frequency I don't understand this question. The part I don't understand is I still couldn't handle low frequency very well. Are you talking about you personally or the theater or your studio? Let me just go back to my notes. These are great, by the way. Keep them coming. I've got about 10 minutes. Oh, this was a good question. So I forget who asked this. If you're on the stream or you watch it afterwards, please let me know. Hey, raise your hand. That was me. I asked that question. Somebody asked the difference in sound editing and mixing a documentary versus a narrative project. So documentary meaning unscripted, probably interviews. It could be a reality show, I guess. And then narrative meaning scripted. There's shots set up. There's story stuff happening. Docs do have storylines that are often manufactured for the agenda of the documentary, but they tend to be more verite or real life. So the difference is when I'm mixing a documentary, docs, I will generally use a lot less noise reduction. In a documentary, I really lean into the noise. I will take some out if it's covering something up or if it needs to be more isolated. You know, maybe it's an emotional thing and the noise is just covering up their sniffles or something. But generally in a doc, I go super light on noise reduction. Also, generally in a doc, I tend to mix less dynamically. The vocals, the dialogue are more even throughout because docs live and die on the production sound, whether it's an interview or a nat sound, you know, like following a character while they're walking through something. You're not adding as much Foley or sound effects. And so I like to just lean into the noise, make sure things are a little more compressed or leveled out, you know, even level on the dialogue. And then the music is always the next most important thing in a doc. Generally, docs will have some special thing like an animated sequence or recurring animation that comes back or reenactments. You'll spend more time on those. Those will have more sound effects. But organizing a doc also into the characters, the interviewees, the people who are interviewed, I'll have 10 to 50 dialogue tracks of interviews so that when we come back to that interview, I can use the same settings. You know, so for like a dialogue edit on a feature film, maybe I'll have 16 dialogue tracks. On a doc, every person is on their own track. So as soon as we come back to their interview, that automation, EQ, compression, reverb, or not reverb, noise reduction is just all the way across the entire film. Good question. And that's kind of a nutshell overview of how I approach docs differently. Let's go back to some questions. Paco, can you show us how we can align Lav to Boom if we don't have a plugin? I've showed this in a video. I can show it to you really quick. Let's see. Okay, this is not aligned here. So let me show you. We're going to switch to slip mode. This will work. I think when I showed this, I showed it in DaVinci Resolve. What you'll need to do is turn your nudge down to like quarter frame or subframe and then align these to the boom. So find a transient sound. Here's a more better one. Find a transient sound and then just start moving your tracks so they all line up. So now these are pretty close to being lined up. But the issue you'll run into is phase. And you can see the top and middle are mostly in phase. I mean, it goes out though, because the boom and lav relationship changes over time. So this is why auto align post is nice, because it'll start lined up and then as soon as somebody moves a centimeter, it doesn't work anymore. But you'll then have to flip the phase. So like this down here, I'm definitely going to have to invert. You can go to other, you can go to invert, and you can flip it. But again, it's going to go out. So then you have to make a bunch of micro cuts. And this is not fun. It's not fun to do this for an entire feature film. To like, you know, okay, it's out here, so let me make this, and then I have to drag this over. Like, that's not fun. So auto line post to me is totally worth it just because that is a nightmare to do. Good question though. Okay, MC Producciones, sorry. How is the best way to handle changes after picture lock? What recommendations could you give to an editor in that case? Have them export EDLs and then use Matchbox to do it for you. Oh, I see. Francois says, if I'm missing an LFE on my studio, is there a way to add it just by watching the meter? I wouldn't do that. LFE is one of the touchiest things to do in a mix. So just fly without the LFE. How can I get heavy low end sound without disturbing the listener's ears? Oh, okay, I understand now. So you need a calibrated studio. There's no way around that. So make sure your room is tuned, especially the low sub frequencies are tuned, and your ears will guide you because, yeah, low, bass, sub bass sounds can be very taxing for viewers, and it's easy to do too much. Ava Studios general random question: what's the industry's opinion of John Purcell? He seems to be very much respected as the father of dialogue edit. Yeah, I mean, his book, The Art of Dialogue Editing, is great. It's a really good book to get if you're into dialogue editing. Everybody has their own methods when it comes to dialogue editing, and it's cool to see his. But obviously, you're gonna develop your own through your career. Okay, Margarita says, what's the best way to shape internal room tones so they match production fills when we can't find the exact same ones? EQ is your friend on that. I'll just show you I'll show you a good shape for backgrounds. I'll let you guys pick. This is one nice thing about a stream. I can either show you my starting background EQ point in FabFilter Pro Q3 or a stock Pro Tools EQ. So whoever answers first, stock or FabFilter, that's the one I'll show you while I read the next question. Just because I don't want people to have to buy plugins. You can mix a film and it'll sound great with just stock Pro Tools plugins. Okay, so while I wait for somebody to chime in on that, Joaquin says, how much time is reasonable to edit dialogue for a 90-minute movie? It's going to totally depend on the budget. 4 weeks is great. If I could do it in 2 weeks if I had to, but 4 weeks is really nice. So, all right. Ava Studio says stock. We're going to bring up our, is it EQ3 7-band. I'll show you a really nice starting point for background EQs. Set your high pass and low pass as low as possible. Can I do 3 dB per octave? Probably not. No, 6 dB per octave. Enable those bad boys. Bring your high pass up to about 130-ish. You can go a little higher than that. And then this is the secret right here. Bring your low pass down to like 4K. And you're going to say, Tom, that is way, 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 way too low. It's going to sound muffled. No, with a 6 dB per octave slope, it is not going to sound muffled. This is going to match a production track so nicely because you are gently rolling off the bass. I mean, look at, let's say this is 200 hertz right here. You're only down like 2 dB at 200 hertz. That's great. However, at 50 hertz, you're down about 8 dB. So this nice gentle roll off is going to match a nice boom recorded dialogue track really well. Let's look at the high frequencies. So isn't this going to sound super muffled? No, because at where this filter is set at 4.3K, which is super low, right? At 4.3K, we are down about 3 dB. That's nice. That'll give you a nice smooth roll off. And all the hiss that's in these backgrounds you've cut is going to get reduced quite a bit. So once we're up to 20K, we're down 12 dB. That is going to match a nice Sheps Super CMIT or an MKH50, MKH40, MKH60. It's maybe not going to match a 416. To match a 416, you'd want to do like this. There we go. That's a nice 416 sound, right? Wait, there we go. This is a 416 sound. But a nice, well-recorded, high-quality boom mic is going to look kind of like this on your frequency display. So this on your dialogue tracks individually or on your dialogue bus is a great starting point. You can always open it up if there's some Tweety birds up here you want to hear more of. But this is a nice starting point for backgrounds that'll help it sound more like production sound. Don't be afraid to do this. Even do this to your regular sound effects, and it's going to help them blend in a little better. Good question. And it's 9 o'clock, so I didn't get to some stuff maybe I wanted to cover, but I really like that you guys drove the discussion on this. So thank you to everybody who chimed in, everybody who asked those hard questions. Thank you so much. If you're interested in more Q&A and back and forth and discussion, please consider joining the channel as a member. There's a little join button on the videos. You just click that, you get an invite to Discord, and that really helps support the channel. So to all channel members, which have been probably most of the questions and comments, thank you guys so much for your support. And also to anybody who has either bought like a Cedar plugin, or better yet, bought this auto compressor or a mix template or any number of things. I've got a practice project you can start working on immediately if you don't have a project to work on. So that all helps immensely. And I try to thank you guys every stream and video, because if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be doing YouTube. So it's you guys that are really to thank for all the content on the channel and all the discussion on the videos and Discord. So thank you guys so much. I'll see you next week. And till then, think of maybe some topics for another stream. I like to tailor them to what you guys are asking about. So drop a chat or comment, or if you're a member, go on Discord and say, hey, Tom, I'd really like to see a stream or a video about this. I do my very best to get to those. So have a good week, and I'll see you next time. Till then, take care.